a part of the tactic and strategy of this. And within that box, we want to get the maximum market access for British companies with the minimum of disruption. And so we'll do what's necessary to that aim.
What if all of those things can't be negotiated within it could be 18 months, depending on
what view is
taken?
Mr. Barnier said 18 months.
Yes.
And I think that it is all negotiable in that time. I mean, that's the sort of core of this, really. We've got a lot to do, but that's one of the reasons. I mean, you may have thought perhaps my opening answer wasn't that helpful, but it's one of the reasons that we are taking our time to get prepared on all fronts. That's why our 57 studies cover 85% of the economy, everything except sectors that are not affected by international trade. So we are aiming to get ourselves in a position where we can negotiate within the Article 50 process. After all, the Article 50 process was written to allow departure from the European Union. That's its purpose. And plainly, the architects of it, the authors of it, thought that it was time enough to do the job. And so do I.
It's one thing for the government to think, well, we'll be organised and ready to do a deal within 18 months, but that may not necessarily be the case for the 27 countries that you are negotiating with. If it isn't possible to do it within the 18 months, then won't there, of necessity, need to be transitional arrangements?
Well, you've been in politics long enough, Mr. Chairman, to know that's a hypothetical question.
Indeed.
However, I'll do my best to answer it for you, even so. Look, a transitional arrangement means many things to different people, and if you think of it as the way I saw it from what the Chancellor said, I think the phrase he used was something like, have been raised within by businessmen, regulators, and as you said, thoughtful politicians. I think the Treasury afterwards added the word European thoughtful politicians to that, but that's by the by. Then it seems to me what they're talking about probably is some sort of implementation mechanism. However, even whatever the transition arrangement is, we need to know where we're going before we decide on the transition. If you build a bridge, you need to have both sides established before you build the bridge. And so we need to know where we're going. It seems to me that it's perfectly possible to know what the end game will be in 2 years.
So you're not opposed to there being transitional arrangements if they prove ultimately to be necessary?
Well, it depends what you mean by transitional arrangements. Implementation phase of something, if it's necessary, and only if it's necessary, yes. But I think the thing to understand here is that the British people want this done with some degree of expedition. They want it done properly and soon. And that's what we're trying to do.
Now, it was reported, you spoke to the City of London Corporation on the 15th of November, and I think what they describe as their informal record of those discussions have been published. And I don't know whether you've had a chance, A, to read it and B, to comment on it. But it was indicated at that point that you were not particularly interested in the arrangements, but were reported to have said that if the EU wanted them, then you would be inclined to be kind to them. Do you think that they're more likely to want transitional arrangements?
Two things, Mr. Chair. Two things, Chairman. Firstly, if I sometimes burst out laughing when I read what I'm supposed to have said in certain circumstances. Okay. It's a syndrome you'll recognise as well as me, I think. And so I don't comment, never comment on these sorts of gossip. I never comment on that. But I think what the substance of your question was, not the commentary, not the gossip. What was the substance?
It's whether you think. By the way, as I understand it, it was their record of the conversation they had with you, which is rather different from gossip. But anyway, it's whether you think the other 27, whether you think the other 27 might wish.
It doesn't correlate
to
with
have
either the government's position.
No, you've made that very clear.
Yeah.
It's whether the 27 might be interested in transitional arrangements.
Well, they may. I mean, as the Chancellor said, his group of people was businessmen, regulators, and he said thoughtful. I think he meant thoughtful European politicians.
All civil servants.
That may be true. I don't think that's true.
Well, that is true, and I didn't.
You'll have to protect me
from that for a reason.
You'll have to protect me from the heckling, Mr. Chairman.
Do you worry about the cliff edge that the Prime Minister acknowledged in answering the question at the CBR?
Well, we've said in terms we want to have a smooth and orderly exit. That's what we want. I think, like all these things, when you go into a negotiation, you try to see where the issues are and you deal with them beforehand. Then you don't have to worry when you get to the end. That's the purpose. We have said to business over and over again, we are trying to get them the maximum opportunity for trade, both within Europe and outside Europe, and the minimum disruption. And that's what we're after.
Does the work that you are currently set in train, does it include a contingency plan in case we end up with no deal, or say the deal, say the deal were voted down by the European Parliament? Is the government thinking about what it would do in those circumstances if we exited with no deal whatsoever?
I will reiterate to you, Mr. Chairman, that is not our intention. We're aiming for a free access, the maximum free access to all possible markets, but we'll do contingency planning for all the likely outcomes.
All the likely outcomes. That's very helpful. And just finally from me, before I turn to colleagues, on membership of the Customs Union, you told the House last week, you said it, and I quote, this is not a binary option. There are about 4 different possibilities.
Yeah, possibly more.
Possibly more,
yeah.
And we are still assessing them. Could you just briefly set out for us what those possibilities are? I'm not asking you to say what the government's conclusion will be, because you haven't reached one yet, but what are the possibilities?
No, there are sort of 2 ways. I'll give you both ways of looking at it, because they're both informative. Firstly, to look at what actually exists at the moment. You have, obviously, countries inside the Customs Union. That's clearly one. You have countries like Turkey, which has an arrangement which puts it inside the Customs Union for some of its economy and outside for others, which allows it to do very limited free trade agreements. You have a circumstance like Norway, which is inside the single market but outside the Customs Union. And you have countries like Switzerland, who are outside the single market but with bilateral, a large number, about 20-something trade deals, and they are outside the Customs Union, but they have customs arrangements. The 4 I had in mind, and as I say, they're not comprehensive, but the sort of 4 staging, if you like, a spectrum, were between inside the Customs Union, a partially inside Turkish model, if you like, outside but with a free trade agreement and a customs arrangement, as happens in some parts of the world, and completely outside. That's the sort of spectrum, if you like.
So that, as I understand it, that list doesn't include trying to be in the Customs Union for certain sectors.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. There are others as well, but they're not on a spectrum. I had, in my mind, a spectrum of 4. It's sort of off to the side of the spectrum. Yeah.
Right. And are you looking at all at whether Northern Ireland might remain within the Customs Union in order to avoid a hard border?
No, that's not one of the options we've been looking at so far, anyway. I mean, what we are determined about, and I'm sure Mr. Durkan will want to raise it with me at some point, we are determined to maintain that as an open border. But as an example of how that might be done, the committee might look at the Norway-Sweden border, where they're both in the single market, but they straddle the Customs Union. And it's a very open border with particular arrangements designed to make the border a free border.
Okay, thank you. Maria Caulfield.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just really want to set the scene for the progress in the department itself, because as a committee we went to visit on the 8th of November and met the department there. And we were told at that time, when we asked about how much resources were in place and staffing, that there were about 300, just over 300 people in the team, but that more was forthcoming. So could you update us on the progress of the actual department itself and what resources you've got and what resources you're still lacking?
We have 300, as the last time I looked was a few days ago, 330 members of the team. And bear in mind, this has grown from about 40 since July. I mean, the basic department didn't exist in June. And it's grown from about 40 in July to 330 now. In addition to that, we have 120 at UCREP who obviously do the representational role in the European Union. But they're also, by definition, experts. They come from all the different departments of Whitehall, and they provide expertise to us as well as a sight of what our European interlocutors' views are. So we have them. There will be more. I don't know what the final number is, because, frankly, what we do, and I think you may have been told this when you were there, is we also have a lot of applications from outside. We have 10 times as many applications inside the civil service as we could take, 10 applications for every job virtually. So we have very, very high quality staff inside, which I hope you sort of saw when you came. And we basically look at what task has to be done and see what needs to be put in place. The Treasury accepted our budget in full. If we need to go above it, then we'll need to use contingency. But because the department will only exist for about 2.5 years, that's not the same sort of problem as it would be as if you had a permanent department. So we don't foresee problems there. The other issue we've had is just geography, and that is I think they were all still in the Cabinet Office when you visited, Chairman?
Yeah.
Sorry, say that again?
Were all my team still in the Cabinet Office when you visited?
Yeah, I think they were about to move.
They're about to move over the road, that's right. So we've got a floor now for that, which will make the thing easier to manage. But that's it. I mean, we're not constrained, except by time. We've got to get this done quickly, and we're doing this at the same time. We're sort of building the machine while we're actually doing the work. So that of course, is an issue for us. But the other thing to bear in mind is the department is a mixture of a coordination, a linking, and a policy department. And we decided right from the beginning that it was not the wise approach to try to replicate every policy section of Whitehall inside my department. So we have people who are very capable, who normally come from the department whose policy they are dealing with, and they both coordinate and deal with the department.